At this time, I'd like to start our open study session with Hutch Paving, represented by the Law Office of Daniel J. Bernard.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Good to see you again, Mr. Mayor. It's been a while. I also want to thank the City Council, or the City's Attorney, Gary Mayaki, and Chrissy Laszlo for getting me, shepherding through my FOIA request and getting me documents that I needed. I'm here tonight to talk to you about the contract, the 2019 contract for the Lewis Manor subdivision paving project. As you know from your discussion back in July, Hutch Paving was the low bidder on the contract by $188,400. Now, you are the City Council. You have every right to pick any bid you want. And I certainly, that's what the bid procedures say. That's what state law says, and I support that. I think it's important, though, that if you make that decision, you're making an informed decision. And after watching the video of the July 9th meeting, I felt as though the council might have been laboring under some misconceptions, and I wanted to just address those tonight, make sure you had all the information before you went ahead and acted later on tonight. So the 2017 project, where there were apparently complaints about Hutch Paving's performance, dealt with Lewis Manor and Valley View subdivisions. Hutch was the low bidder on that project and completed the project under budget with no claims against the performance bond or the payment bond. There were about 300,000 square feet of asphalt laid down by Hutch Paving in that project. The amount that they had to redo, which they did earlier this year, was about 1,000 square feet. So about 0.3% of the entire project had to have some work done on it because this new process that was being used of laying fabric in between the layers, there were a couple of spots where the top layer was too thin and the fabric was peeking through. So there was a meeting on June 28th of this year with City, the engineer, Hutch Paving. They went out and milled those sections on July 3rd and repaved them on July 9th. So from June 28th to July 9th, that work was done. That was the only defect in the project itself. All of the other complaints with the project dealt with driveways that were flooding, the approaches to the driveways. And here it's important to understand exactly what the project entailed. You had concrete roads, and Hutch was putting about 3 inches of asphalt on top of the concrete road. So they would come out, they would mill off the existing asphalt. Wade Trim, the engineers who were out there every single day, would mark the concrete that needed to be repaired. Hutch would repair that concrete and then lay the asphalt according to the plans. And they did lay it according to the plans. They were completely paid. Any punch lists were satisfied. There were no issues at all with Hutch's performance on the project. But when you raise the level of the road relative to the driveway approach, now you've got driveway approaches that are flooding when it rains. This was not unanticipated by the engineers because this was allowed for in the contract, and in 2018, Hutch went back out and fixed every driveway approach that the engineers pointed out. But you remember when the project was done. It was done between September and November of 2017. So the following spring, when the flooding was noted, the engineers called, went back out, showed Hutch what to do. Hutch fixed every driveway within the scope of the original contract. So this driveway defect was not a defect in any workmanship of Hutch. It was a natural consequence of raising the road level relative to the driveway approaches. So that was the primary complaint, and the repairs done this year for those two sections of 1,000 square feet I want to point out, this contract carries a 1-year warranty. So Hutch did the work in the fall of 2017, but no problem, they went back out and fixed those 2 places this year, because that's what Hutch does. Hutch is very proud of its reputation, it's proud of the work it does, and the fabric that caused these issues is not being used anymore in the 2019 project. Now they're going to a fiber mix in the asphalt instead of the fabric. There was some talk at the last session in July about the condition of Hass Road and how Hass Road is terrible. Hutch never paved Hass Road. That was not part of that project. They'd certainly be willing to pave it if you want to give them a contract to do that, but that Hutch is not responsible for the condition of Hass Road. Hutch has never touched Hass Road. So now they've submitted a bid for 2019 that's $188,400 less than the bid from Cadillac Asphalt, which was the bid you approved at the July 9th session. There are no differences in the specifications of the job. They're all the same for all the bidders. You're not getting more asphalt, better asphalt, any better roads by spending $188,000 more on Cadillac Asphalt. In my opinion, it's a waste of $188,000 based upon some anecdotal evidence that turns out not to be true, or at least not to be within the scope of Hutch's contract from 2017. Hutch Paving values its relationship with the city and all of the cities it serves. It's proud of the work it did in 2017, proud of its relationship, how it worked with all the city departments, and how it worked with Wade Trim. They have a long history of working with Wade Trim. And I think it was Dan Brooks from Wade Trim who said at the July 9th meeting, it's been 2 winters and the roads are holding up very well, because they were very well done. They want to continue to work with the city. Hutch believes it provides the best value for the city, and while it may be too late for this project, certainly your parliamentarian will tell you how you can reverse the previous votes and reinstate Hutch as the winning contractor on this project, and it's not too late to do that to get the work done this season. But even if you don't do that, it's very important to Hutch that in the future they have a clean slate with you, that you understand they did a good job. They did a great job in 2017. They stand behind their work. There were no issues. Everything that you've talked about was contemplated at the time of the project and covered in the contract and was taken care of pursuant to the contract. So in the future, Hutch simply asks for fair consideration based on its performance, not in spite of it, but because of it, and pledges the same wonderful performance in the future. So I have Michael Chunko here from Hutch, who was the project manager, who's prepared to answer any of the technical questions I don't understand. But other than that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilman Abdullah?
So just a question for you. The job that you mentioned that was fixed properly after 2017, just for full disclosure to the audience, can you give us the streets that you're referencing instead of just the subdivision?
The fabric streets. Was that?
Talking about north of Ford Road, east of Inkster,
Yeah,
predominantly?
trying to remember exactly.
Yes.
I think we have the pictures. There were 2 spots.
Carewood, Berea.
Ones we looked at, okay.
Yeah.
So
ahead.
I can tell you for myself, and I know Councilman Muscat happened to have seen it at the time too, and I'm not an expert on roads, not by any stretch of the imagination, but just visually looking at it at the time, because I had some residents call and were complaining, and I said, let me go by and look at it. And I went by to look at it. There was a crack for multiple blocks, if I'm not mistaken, right down the middle, all the way through. It was like a seam.
Yes.
There is a seam, and that's, even I can handle this one.
Okay,
All right, so you've got a concrete road underneath
okay.
with a seam down the middle. The, excuse me, the asphalt is laid over the top of that. Because you need a slight crown, you can't run a press or anything down the middle of the road. You do one side of the road and you do the other side of the road and you kind of push them together. And it seals. But the concrete moves. And that movement of the concrete is reflected in the asphalt. And that's called a reflective crack. No asphalt company can guarantee against reflective cracking in that situation because there's no way to keep the asphalt from cracking.
Well, the challenge would be with the change in weather allowing for more cracks. Now, I tell you myself, just based on, I'm a real estate agent that's my business. So I'm obviously driving around streets all the time and houses and what have you. And that was the first time I could ever recall seeing a street with that type of a seam, crack, or whatever you want to call it, all the way down the middle. In addition to that, I'm going to tell you the other thing I had seen as far as myself visually and from residents' complaints. The curb, as the asphalt comes to the end of the street, between the curb, the little curb right at the end of the grass there, at the end of the easement, and the asphalt, there was, typically you see enough of a divide to where water can run through all the way down to the drain. This one was more like this much of a difference. It was much shorter in front of multiple houses on that street where there was not much of a curb. It was almost flush. I wouldn't say flush. Flush is a strong word, but it was close to being flush with the curb.
So the problem with paving over concrete, and obviously if you put concrete back, it's going to be a $10 million job. So
Right.
You do asphalt because it's less expensive and you can do it 3 times as much, okay? So the problem with concrete, it flows at 1%, okay? I think I've even seen it, you had said you were a concrete person before on the last.
No. I'm a realtor.
Okay, anyway, concrete can flow at 1% grade. Asphalt cannot carry it like that because when you put concrete in and you form it and you place it, it's hard and it stays there. Asphalt's kind of a more softer product and it moves, so when you roll it, you might get a little bit of up and down because if there's a deviation in the concrete below or something, you might think will sink or something. So what happens is we need a higher percentage of fall to make that water run. So what happens is we come up on the curb as needed, and that's why weight trim, that's why they allow that. You got to kind of put a little bit of high points in these so that water runs down. It doesn't run at the same rate as concrete would normally allow, and that's why you have curb and gutters. You usually want to go into that curb and gutter, but now we've taken away that curb and gutter by paving to the curb.
But my challenge is for just the average resident, and I can't speak on your expertise, obviously, that's not my field, but just from a pure resident's perspective, they're seeing the water, instead of going to the drain, overflowing onto their easement, and the water just sitting there. That's a part of the challenges that a lot of residents had. And then we had complained about it at city council meetings, and Wade Trim was here, and we kept hearing they're going to fix it, 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 and we took it at word that it is going to be fixed. But up until, I think it was off the top of my head, I think it was about 2 or 3 meetings ago, I can't remember off the top of my head, where it hadn't been fixed yet, and that's where we started to get concerned.
We have no complaints about any, the fabric. If you're talking about the fabric and fixing the fabric, those areas we fixed this year.
I'm talking about the curb situation and then the seam down the middle.
We were not notified of any seam problems until when we met out there in June. That's when we were notified about it.
Then communication, with all due respect to Wade Trim, they dropped the ball.
That's your engineer. I can only do what I know that there's a problem with. I just paid it full. We went out there, we did the driveways in 2018 because those were an issue. And no fault of our own, but we got paid for it and it was part of the contract, and there was no communication or nothing documented that there was even a problem.
So I'm not sure if Jack or John Selmy can answer this because Wade Trim is not here. Are you guys aware of them being
Someone
told?
wasn't here then.
All honesty, I don't know.
He wasn't here.
He wasn't here.
We did submit.
No, that's what I'm asking. No. He wasn't here when it was done, but when we were complaining about it, Wade Trim had mentioned that Dan Brooks had mentioned that they would let them know.
Well,
But
we
now
did-
the gentleman's saying they don't know.
We
They
did
didn't.
submit a Freedom of Information Act request for any complaints or inspection reports from Wade Trim. And we got everything. Chrissy says we got everything. I believe we got everything. They basically end in 2018 with the curbs. There's no complaint anywhere in this stack about the seam down the center.
Okay, Councilman Muscat?
And typically, that's something that could be filled anyway.
Yeah, that would be no problem, actually.
Gentlemen, I grew up on Fairwood.
Okay.
I was there in the 60s, okay? And I happen to know just about everybody on Fairwood, all the way from Ford Road to around the corner to Dearborn, okay? And people have complained to me since that was paved with their driveways flooding at the end of their driveways, even after everything was poured. My mother still lives there. She had a driveway poured, and it still floods there when it rains heavily. Now, as I go down that street the other day, I saw where 2 sections were milled out where the drains were, and that's the only repairs I physically saw on Fairwood, okay?
That's correct.
And then people are still complaining, they're sweeping up asphalt around the edges of the curbs where it's so thin that it's coming up. Now,
But
this is the first time today we heard anything about a fabric.
Right, correct.
Never heard anything about a fabric, okay? I'm thinking that this was done the conventional way of when you lay the first section down and then you put some sort of adhesive between the two and then you roll it again with a second coat. This is the first I heard of a fabric.
no, what was done, they say, so they provide a fabric. So there's only one company that does fabric, actually. All the bidders had to use the same company. They're out of Chicago. And they put this fabric down. And the problem with the fabric is if I mill it again, you can't take it back to the plant now. It makes the asphalt, you can't.
Can't reuse it.
Yeah, we hate using it, to be honest with you. I mean, but it's put down to help to stop the center cracking, the reflector cracking, all these issues that you're talking about cracking. That's why the fabric was installed. That's why they didn't even do it this year. If you look in your specs this year, it's a microfiber, which is also a new product. Concrete, fiber concrete. Now they're putting it in asphalt. It's a new product. And they're trying to do with that so they're trying to retard that, reflective cracking from the concrete. Concrete moves like this. My pavement usually would be on stone, and you would have, just like you said, 2 layers of asphalt with a tack coat in the middle, and it would be, you wouldn't have these problems. But again, you're getting a new road for 1/3 of the price or 1/4 of the price. So this is kind of what the trade-off is. You're not getting a brand new concrete road. We're not working with a brand new base underneath. And on the driveways, we were never, if there was any issue with the driveway, other than 2018, the spring of 18, and the ones they marked, we replaced everyone they marked. There was nothing conveyed to us, no emails, no complaints, nothing. So I can't fix something I don't know about.
And believe me, being in the maintenance trades, I had customers, just like you have a customer. If you don't know this is broke, you can't fix it.
Exactly.
Right.
And I agree with you 100% on that. And I appreciate that very much. But did you guys replace any of the curbs? Was that done by you?
There was very little curb, yes, there was very little curb done because they were trying to hold money to the end of the project because they knew the budget was tight. They didn't have any extra money to go over budget. So Wade Trim was trying to hold their budget in tight, so they were just doing minimal amounts of curb, just a real worst of the
Because on
worst.
some of the curbs, might as well not done anything. They're flush with the street. There's one in front of my mom's house that,
Yeah, I'm sure there is because we're trying to get grade, we're trying not to leave water because that's the very, we do this process.
but the curb, I mean, it's the curb. The water doesn't sit on the curb.
Well,
Water goes off the curb and into the street, but if there's no curb,
The area you're looking at, if I could see, maybe we could talk about it. I'd be happy to meet you anytime you want out there and look at it with you. I was unaware of any issues except for until actually senior meeting, to be honest with you. I was low bid and I thought I was getting the job because I thought we did a great job, So other than any communication about some driveways and being notified in March about a couple of bare areas. And the other problem is when you go over the concrete road, when you're trying to make the water run, as you get, I think you're aware that they're at the catch basin tournament, you're trying to thin up so that water will run to that catch basin.
Correct.
So you don't even know how thick your asphalt is sometimes. So when you're rolling it and you're coming down to that catch basin, you want to make sure it gets to that catch basin so we don't leave it in your mom's driveway, We're trying our best, but it's hard because, one piece of concrete's like this, another one's like this, you're trying to do your best, but it's not a perfect situation.
but just let you know, there have been complaints ever since they did the road,
Yeah.
so.
There has
they've
been,
been going
yes.
on and on and on.
Non-stop.
We've had people
Every
come to the council
meeting.
meetings and complain about them.
Well, if-
This time I'm going to call on Councilman Wenzel, and we need to move along. We're
Okay.
running behind schedule.
Well, normally, you'd raise the catch basins on the job done properly. You'd raise them up to the grade of the asphalt, so you wouldn't have to dip down so far and thin your asphalt out. I've seen that done dozens of times. But knowing that, like the substrate, which is the old concrete road, had an expansion joint down the middle, you're not going to keep that from cracking no matter how much mesh you put on top of it. I drove by there after hearing about it, and I seen the crack. Isn't there a procedure where you can cut a line and caulk it?
Yes, you can hot rubber it. It's done all the time by MDOT. They do if you look at the roads, or we can hot tar it with an overbanding, which we do in-house. And if we were aware that was a problem, we would have been happy to do that.
Well, you said that that control joint in the middle moves, and it's going to crack anyway. So that's an issue that is familiar with you, and that's something that should have been brought up, that you could take care of that situation. Because I drove by it after I heard the crack. I said, wow, look, there's a...
Well, normally a hairline crack, you usually don't put anything in there until it separates, because you have to have a little room to get it in, obviously.
Well, asphalt,
Again-
in the wintertime, you get
Yes.
water in that hairline crack, and what happens?
Well, of
It gets
course.
bigger and bigger.
But again, we do what weight trim tells us.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question,
So-
Councilman Abdullah?
So quick statement, I'm going to make it public. I'm very disappointed with provided you're telling us provided what you're telling us is correct, I'm really disappointed, whether it's administration, whether it's weight trim, I don't know who did it, but I'm really disappointed that you guys don't know about this, based on you telling me you don't know about this, because I know all of us as council members have complained about this for probably last year. So I'm really, really disappointed with whoever dropped the ball. And whoever did, they got to deal with this. This is not okay. But the main reason I want to ask you is, you mentioned the main problem was the fabric that was used, right?
It's not an easy thing to work with, correct?
Okay, so how are we going to be, not as a council, but as a city, compensated? Because, the fabric, I didn't pick the fabric, I didn't do anything with this. You guys picked the fabric.
No, I did not.
Okay, was that a part of the requirements?
The specs?
Specified.
Weight trim puts out a bid. We bid on asphalt units. They specify what we're going to do. They tell us what driveways to pull out, which ones to don't. We get paid per the unit. We get paid by the ton, by the square foot, by the length of the foot of curb we put in. We don't determine.
So who decided that they wanted fabric in there? Because you're saying fabric is bad.
Well, no, I'm saying the fabric's a difficult thing to work with. I think they thought it would help retard the reflective cracking. I just said it's not an easy product to work with, plus when you're trying to get to the catch basins. And when you said about adjustment of the catch basins, I can't adjust any catch basins. They're in there unless they're marked to do. I mean, I'm not going to do something I'm getting paid for, nobody would,
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This time that concludes.
But you left us with at least a clean slate on what you do and how well you do it. And you left it with me, at least.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we move on to our next open study session. That's the amendment to Chapter 37, Small Cell Wireless Communication Facilities, Deployment Act PA 365 of 2018. Mark Roberts, Michael Salhaney, and Seacrest Wardle.
Evening, Council. Mark Roberts from Seacrest Wardle. I'm here with Mike Salhaney from our office. Mr. Salhaney's kind of our specialist in this area. This is something that has come up fairly recently, and the city does not currently have a small cell ordinance. I'm here basically for advice on the process for adoption. I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Salhaney to explain what this ordinance is all about and why it's necessary.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Salhaney, partner at Seacrest Wardle with Mark. Last year, the state of Michigan adopted a new state law. It went into effect in March that drastically affected the city's ability to regulate its own rights-of-way, and that has to do with small cell technology. What this technology is, for those of us that just want our cell phone to work, is there are DTE poles that line your streets. Instead of having a big cell tower, telecommunication companies are rolling out 5G technology, and the way that technology moves along is on the top of these DTE poles, and it goes from one small little antenna to the next, to the next, to the next. The state of Michigan has mandated that local municipalities cannot regulate this rollout of this technology. In fact, the state of Michigan, from my experience in front of the MPSC on telecommunication matters, is they are telling us their job is to roll this technology out. So what does that mean to you? That means when you have a telecommunication provider that wants to come and go in your rights of way, you utilize the Metro Act, and you make them get a permit and they pay you fees. It's a similar process here under the Small Cell Act. The provider has to file a permit, tell you which poles they're going on, the distance that they're going to be from each other, and you have the opportunity to look at the permit. If you don't approve it within 45 days, it is deemed approved. And there is a fee schedule. There's a fee set by the state of Michigan for the application and for each pole. Now, you also don't have the ability under this state law in your business in any area that's not a residential district, you can't control how these things look like. The state of Michigan has taken that power away from you. You can regulate what these towers or these small cells will look like in residential zone districts or in your downtown business district. And these permits are coming. They are backed by the providers with a lot of money, specifically Verizon and AT&T. And if you are challenged, I can tell you the temperature of the state of Michigan is they will rule against you. What the statute that they passed late last year and became effective in March is probably one of the most complicated statutes I have looked at in 3 years of law school and 30 years of legal practice. It's all over the place. So what I've done is, and Mark and your staff, we have prepared an ordinance that complies with everything with the state law. And in fact, I made it actually make sense. It is a guide that will help you from the minute the application comes in. And you need this ordinance so that your staff will know what to do, the timeframes that they need to do it, how much you can charge per poll, how much you can charge per application, if the application is not complete, what your rights are. And that is, you can communicate with the provider within so many days of receiving the application and tell them, this is not complete, here's what's missing, here's what we need. And it stops that shot clock for whether it's deemed complete or not. And if you don't approve it in an unreasonable nature, you'll find yourself in front of Lansing, in front of the MPSC, explaining why you did not approve either in time or at all an application. So this ordinance takes the state law, it makes it make sense as best that it can, and I think it does a fairly good job. We've also created for you an application. So not only does the ordinance comply 100% with the statute, we took the language right out of the statute and put it in order, but we created an application. And it details everything that's in the statute that you're allowed to ask for in an application. And I also have put in there the fee schedule that you're allowed to charge a provider when they file the application and when they identify the polls. And so that way, staff knows exactly what they can charge the provider. Then, much like the Metro Act, once it's been reviewed by all of your departments that need to review it, you can issue them what you might remember as being the old franchise agreement, like the old cable franchise agreements or the old rights-of-way franchise agreements before the Metro Act. And that lays out all of your rights. I also created another, we've called it an addendum. The city may own certain telephone poles along the streets. That's a different type of agreement than if it's a DTE pole. You don't own the DTE poles, DTE does. So we have one agreement for all of the nodes that they're going to put on DTE poles, and they will have to identify what is on your property. And that's a separate agreement and different terms. I have included the language for insurance. I've included hold harmless language, indemnification language, so that we protect the city. We've also clarified and explained the remedies. If they don't roll out their system within X number of days, it's deemed abandoned. And if they have stuff up on the poles, they have to pull it out. And if they don't, you can revert it to your system and make it your small cell and convert it to city property. And so what we've tried to do is make sure that the city complies with the law. I believe tonight is an introduction of the ordinance alone. I think you can consider the application, the fee structure, and the two franchise agreements at a later date. And I'm not sure if this needs to go to planning. So I guess the recommendation would be, of course, if you have any questions, I stand ready. But I guess the recommendation would be to have this body recommend the language of the ordinance to Planning Commission, put it on their next available meeting agenda for their review, consideration, and recommendation back to you. So if you have any questions.
I've got, go ahead.
Councilman Wenzel?
Yeah, I got 4 quick ones. Are these going to replace the typical cell tower?
In some instances, yes, for when there is 5G technology.
Now, is there rent involved on these?
There is, and that's out.
The city would receive rent on a city pole, and DTE would be the major renter
Yes.
in this deal.
And much like the Metro Act, where you get, I think it's like 7 cents or 15 cents a lineal foot, there is a fee that the provider will pay that'll flow back to the city. It's a few cents per node, and that money can go into your right-of-way maintenance fund, just like the Metro Act
What are the
funds.
size of these antennas? Are they dish antennas or a rod?
If I understand what they're explaining, you'll have the pole, you'll have a box on the pole with their electrical equipment to keep it out of the hands of people, curious to say, what are all these electronics? And then on the top of the pole, you'll have something that, if I understand, may look like a morel mushroom or like a small antenna or an array of antennas where the signal will go from pole to pole to pole.
How close, or how far apart do you imagine these things being?
The statute and the ordinance sets forth that spatial distance.
Like what?
It can be 200 feet, it could be 800 feet. And I think that's where we get our engineers talking to their engineers to say, listen, we're not going to deny you, but we have a question. Can you space these out, or do you need them that close? Can we reduce numbers?
Pretty close, at least a couple every block.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in the residential blocks, you have the right to enforce your zoning ordinances.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councilman Bazey next. and then-
So you mentioned that you wanted to refer this to Planning Commission, then why is it on our agenda for?
I believe because it has something to do and is involved in your land use and your rights of way.
Okay, so.
If I could respond to
Go
that,
ahead.
it's brought to your attention basically for informational purposes, so it doesn't catch you off guard. I think the ordinance, as Mike has explained it, allows the city to regulate these uses to the extent allowed by state law. The reason it needs to go to Planning Commission is because it is a land use regulation. Under the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, any regulation that affects the use of land must be referred to the Planning Commission for a public hearing and a recommendation back to the council.
Okay, so second question is, you mentioned basically we have no say-so. I mean, the state overruled the municipalities. So what happens if the resident, I mean, right now, the state, I don't think I've seen anything other than what was presented by this gentleman about the harm to, or the potential harm to residents. So has the state released anything to the residents of the state to say, hey, we're going to do this, there's nothing you can do about it? Or are they saying, hey, this is not going to be harmful for the residents? I mean, if you're going to put it on towers in people's backyard and there's children in the area, or, at daycare or anything like that. So I didn't see anything in the ordinance that you actually had in here that excludes them from putting it or having the residents have the say, so like, no, you can't put this in my backyard. My children plays back there. There's a playground back there. So I don't know what's going on with the state regarding that.
So that's a multi-layer onion. What I can tell you, going back to the FCC has a rule that says that there are no health consequences, and you cannot make that as a municipality a condition for denial, much like the cell towers and the radiation that was a concern. Now, if the proposed small cell is in a residential district, you have the ability to zone, and you still have that degree of control to zone and say, well, not here because there's a playground, but how about over here? This may be a more appropriate distance away from that playground or this home. But you are correct. The state of Michigan was very clear in its pronouncement that they're taking away local control.
Okay, so last question. Okay, so I traveled overseas many times, and I've seen a lot of countries actually more advanced. I mean, we're more advanced than them. They're using, like you mentioned earlier, the towers, higher towers. So why can't we, I mean, I know this is above us, you know, it's a state level. Why is the state looking into saying, hey, let's look at the, you know, tower that is much higher than what they have, and put repeater towers in different locations instead of infringing on residents, you know, to put stuff in their backyard?
That is a very good question that has been addressed. What I can tell you is the major providers, Verizon and AT&T, and to an extent T-Mobile, those towers cost a lot of money, and the repeater equipment costs a lot of money. This is a technology that advances it to 5G. They don't have to have the expensive cell tower agreements for their 5G. They may have it for their cell phone technology, but not for 5G. And the telecommunication industry has successfully lobbied Washington, D.C. on that respect.
Okay, thank you.
Despite all of the efforts of groups here at the statewide, not only in Michigan, but nationwide.
Councilman Muscat?
Question asked and answered.
Got it. Councilman Abdullah?
So I still have some serious concerns about this. We had a study session in regards to 5G, and the gentleman that presented to us and actually sent us a lot of emails over the last year or so, emails, videos, whatever, and I do realize obviously a lot of it is internet-based, and I know you could find on the internet just about anything, depends on which direction you want to take the argument. But that being the case, it's definitely raised some concerns for me with this 5G stuff. I mean, enough to be concerned for my kids and obviously for a lot of other residents. We cannot, like, is there, you're telling me at the state level, you're saying that they said this was okay, right, the 5G?
That's my understanding, yes. That, and that they are going to roll it out.
No matter what.
No matter what. Matter of fact, the law is in effect. And if I were Verizon or T-Mobile and I wanted to place my small cells on DTE poles throughout your city and you don't approve me, number one, it's deemed granted. And number two, your disapproval or failure to approve would be a cause for complaint at the MPSC.
I just don't understand how there could be that much concern, and I realize it's from the one gentleman, but I've seen just enough material from him and my own little research on this, that this 5G stuff, I mean, just over and over and over, all you hear is it's bad, cancer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that they could not only roll it out. I mean, honestly, when I never thought it'd be this close, and then here we are a week and a half, 2 weeks later, and here it is coming into our town. I'm just really, really concerned, and I don't know which level can stop this, or at least at the very minimal, get us enough research on this to figure out that it is, as the state would say, okay. Because obviously if it's okay, then everybody's fine with it. I just can't believe that we are in a time right now in this world or in this city where they could roll it out and we have no say-so, despite at the very minimal, perceived dangers to our residents and our families. It just sounds even crazy that can happen without any input from us.
There are many that do not disagree with you. The state of Michigan has taken over the regulatory authority and said this is going to be rolled out, and we've taken that away from our local municipalities. We've given you the rights that you have through the statute, which is, really not much.
Now, the second question I had is that during the presentation, during the study session, the gentleman mentioned that there is a possibility that they could be putting these towers every 2 homes. And then I even asked and verified again. And he said, yes, every 2 to 10 homes. So I said, forget about the 10 homes. Let's talk about the 2. I said, 2 homes? He said, 2 homes, according to them, that little tower can be put up. It's a little scary. And I'm not a scientist, but it just sounds crazy that we can get that type of exposure to our families, every 2 homes to have a tower. And I don't know if you know much about it, but that's what the gentleman mentioned.
And I think that I know the gentleman who you speak of, and I don't disagree. I do know from when I was involved in the Metro Act in Lansing, helping to draft the applications and the statute, that the industry was saying, if your engineers will talk to our engineers, and forget the lawyers, we can work it out. But I don't disagree with you. There will be a profitability component, saying, do we want to put another small cell node every 2 houses, or can we spread it out? I think the providers are also telling us they want to be a good partner with local municipalities, and so they're not going to, I think they'll overreach, but I think that they won't overreach as significantly as maybe some of the concerns that have been shared will be.
Well, I'll say it publicly, I'm disappointed from the state level that we have no say-so. I just, it seems inconceivable, but I'm really disappointed, but
That concern and that disappointment is shared by many municipalities across the state.
Okay, Councilman Constant.
Thank you. What's the group that the attorney at Hutch, Xavier, the state group?
That's ProTech.
ProTech.
I've worked with Mr. Watsa for a number of years, especially when I was trying the case that brought about the Metro Act and working on the collaborative process where I created the Metro Act permits and documents. I worked with Mr. Watsa on that. He was there if I had. He was offering his insights and input, so he's familiar with this technology. He's very involved with ProTech, and he voices the concerns of many municipalities.
And so is Bill Irving at the city of Dearborn, correct?
Yes.
But when a former state rep, he was from Redford, but he had most of Dearborn Heights, when I started in the legislature, had helped push through the AT&T bill that limited the franchise fees that cities got.
Yes. I was there for that too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, any further questions? That concludes our study session. We'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice night.